on CSR, moving the industry forward, sponsored by the Worldwide Responsible Credit Production, or RAP. My name is Nate Herman, and I am the Senior Vice President for Supply Chain for the American Apparel and Footwear Association. I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin today's program, I want to review a few technical issues. If you're having audio challenges, please dial in using your telephone. This number is located in the audio section of the control panel on your screen. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, please contact GoToWebinar support at 1-800-263-6317. All participants will be muted during today's program. If you have a question, please type it in the question box on your control panel. We will address as many questions as possible, and the speaker will respond via email to any unanswered questions after the webinar. Before we begin, let me give you some information about the American Apparel and Footwear Association. AAFA is the national trade association representing apparel, footwear, and other sewn products companies and their suppliers which compete in the global market. Representing more than 1,000 world-famous name brands, retailers, and manufacturers, the American Apparel and Footwear Association is the trusted public policy and political voice of the apparel and footwear industry, its management and shareholders, its 4 million U.S. workers, and its contribution of $384 billion in annual U.S. retail sales. AAFA provides exclusive expertise in supply chain management, trade policy, and brand protection to help our members navigate the complex regulatory environment and lower costs. Members gain unparalleled access to information and exclusive insights on regulation and policy, and premier opportunities for networking and collaboration. AAFA is an advocate, providing a platform for policy development and building consensus on industry issues. Education, training, and information, such as today's webinar, support the demand for real-time tools. We have a great program planned, so let's get started by introducing today's speakers, Avedis, Seferian, and Clay Hickson. Avedis joined RAP in 2004 and was named President and CEO of RAP in 2012. He has extensive knowledge of social responsibility issues within the highly complex supply chains of the apparel, textile, and footwear sectors. A recognized expert in the area of social compliance and responsible sourcing, Avedis often speaks on topics in this field at different forums around the world, and he's contributed to many leading trade publications and news outlets. He serves on the board of advisors of the Alliance for Bangladesh Worker Safety, is chairman of the board of the Association of Professional Social Compliance Auditors, or APSCo, which we'll hear more about in a moment, and sits on the impartiality committees of several audit organizations. Clay is the Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at RAP, where he specifically focuses on managing relationships with global brands and retailers and with governmental and other stakeholder organizations. Clay has extensive experience in international marketing, corporate communications, strategic planning, and cross-cultural communications. Clay has developed and led seminars and other initiatives around the world in the field of social responsibility in collaboration with audit firms, manufacturing facilities, industry associations, government bodies, and others, which initiatives have facilitated understanding of socially responsible and ethical practices, as well as an understanding of how to implement social compliance programs. Today's webinar will provide an overview of the current social compliance landscape, looking at the various initiatives at play. For your reference, a PDF copy of today's presentation is available for download in the handouts section of your control panel. It will also be emailed to you after the program. And with that, Avedis, please begin.
Thank you, Nate. Hi, everyone. This is Avedis Seferian, and me and my colleague Clay will be walking you through the rest of this webinar. As Nate already mentioned, the idea here is to provide a survey of the field, talking to you about what the existing landscape looks like with regards to initiatives in the CSR social compliance space. I want to make clear up front that this is only going to be an illustrative survey. not an exhaustive one. I couldn't possibly have enough time to talk about all the things happening in this space within the hour we have allotted to us. And also, I want to make clear that the initiatives we're going to be talking about are the ones that are relatively new. What's happening of late. I'm not going to spend time talking about already established, long settled programs, and so I won't be talking to you about the work that we do at RAP, for example, or any of our peers. There's plenty of folks in this space that you're probably already quite familiar with. The idea here is to talk about things that you might not be quite as familiar with, and as I said, we're going to be focusing on the relatively new initiatives. I also want to make one other thing clear up front, and that is that we're simply providing information, not necessarily endorsing or speaking for any of these initiatives that we're going to be talking about. Some of them are initiatives that we're involved with, and we'll let you know which those are, and we can probably speak for to a certain degree, but not all. Some of them we're not involved with, but they're out there, and we feel it's important to know what the lay of the land looks like. The way we're going to do this, I'll tell you up front what 10 initiatives we're going to cover between myself and Clay, and then we're going to switch off, taking them one at a time. So do a little bit of a good cop, bad cop kind of thing, except we're both good cops. So the 10 we're going to talk to you about are the Social and Labor Convergence Project, or SLCP, the Association of Professional Social Compliance Auditors, or APSCo. We'll give you an update on the Accord, as well as on the Alliance. We'll talk to you a little bit about the Better Buying Initiative. Talk to you also about Retail Ethical Sourcing Assessment, or RASIA. Talk about various mapping initiatives that are out there. Talk about the Textile Exchange's Responsible Standards and a new initiative that they have just recently launched under that umbrella. Talk about the socially responsible investor space and how that engagement with the business world has evolved of late. And then the last one is not a specific initiative so much as a discussion of informal networks and the role that they've been playing in our space. So as I said one more time, it's an illustrative, not an exhaustive list, and it's concentrating on sort of recent initiatives, not stuff that have been around for a while that you should all already be quite familiar with. So with that, Clay, over to you to start us off about SLCP.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you, at least technologically. As Avedis said, we'll start off talking about the Social and Labor Convergence Project, SLCP. That was launched just 2 years ago this month, initially with 33 signatories. That number has grown, as you'll see here. In fact, since we put this slide together based on information from the Secretariat, that number has grown from 153. Yesterday it was 155. Now it's 157 signatories, of which RAP is one, and many brands and retailers, many of you on this call, the AAFA, are actually signatories to this initiative, which has a mission of creating a converged assessment tool or framework that supports many different stakeholders' efforts to improve working conditions in the global apparel and footwear supply chain. This initiative is focusing on these sectors, but potentially has broader application across many different sectors. This is meant to be a standard agnostic tool. It is not meant to be a new standard. It is not trying to replicate the failed harmonization efforts over the last several decades, but to provide a very user-friendly tool and verification methodology that will allow us all to continue doing our work, whether we're RAP or a brand or a retailer, and use it in a way that we can make decisions based on the factual responses that are given by the assessments. Now, just one bit of update on where this has gone. Earlier in this year, there was an initial prototype of the tool that was done. Now, in just the next week or two, a second prototype of both the tool, the assessment questionnaire, and the verification methodology will actually go into place, and that will include two parts. One will be first a self-assessment and then a joint assessment, which will include really the verification methodology. And so for additional information, of the program, which is expected to be fully launched in the second quarter of 2018, there you can actually go to the SLCP website, which is here on the screen. RAP is represented, and I sit on the governing steering committee of the project, and everyone is certainly welcome to get involved. The more that we are all on the same page working together, we will actually be able to see some real results, minimizing audit fatigue, and actually being able to redeploy our resources in a way that will allow us to make the continuous improvements that all of us want to make in this global supply chain. And this is not a brand retailer initiative. It includes manufacturers, it includes standard holders, it includes many other stakeholders across the world among those signatories. So we'll turn it back over to you, Avedis.
All right, thank you very much. Now that you have this first slide, let me just point out that this is generally the format we're going to be following. Each slide will have a little bit of background information about the initiative and where applicable, and it's going to be applicable in most places. We'll have the website at the bottom for you to get more information if you wish, and you can obviously download the PDF of the slides and have access to those links. Next, we're going to talk about the Association of Professional Social Compliance Auditors, or APSCo. As Nate mentioned during the introductions, I happen to be the chair of the board of APSCo, which is a relatively new initiative that was established, at least on paper, in September of 2015, so a little over 2 years ago, but really only came into its own last year when we hired the executive director and had the inaugural General Assembly, which was in November of 2016 here in New York City, where I am right now. And since then, it has grown tremendously with regards to coverage and what we're trying to do. The mission really is very simple. This is going to be the body that does to auditing what the Bar Association does for lawyers and the Medical Association does for doctors, professionalizing the industry. The mission, as you see out there, enhance the professionalism and credibility of individuals and organizations performing independent social compliance audits. It is an entity that has really, we've had a need for this for a long time now. There have been prior attempts at organizing something akin to this. In fact, there have been precisely 5 prior attempts. This is the 6th attempt at doing this, but this is the one that has come the farthest and really is poised to truly become the standard setting, the professional body for this industry. At the moment, there are 35 audit firms that are members, representing easily the lion's share of all social compliance audits being done out there, certainly in the apparel, footwear, so on product space. We have, over the past several months, put forward several important formative documents: the competency framework, the code of professional conduct for public comment. That public comment period closed several weeks ago, and now we're assessing the comments and are moving to finalize those documents and prepare for what's going to be an important pilot of the examination process to qualify auditors, to call them certified social compliance auditors, or CSCAs. The pilot will take place in 2 phases next month, on the 9th and 10th of November in Istanbul, and the 15th and 16th of November in Shenzhen. And we are looking forward to publicizing the results of that pilot following our General Assembly next General Assembly, which will be in December in Cologne, Germany. The website, again, is there at the bottom, and this is one of those initiatives that we are heavily involved in as RAP, and so definitely happy to answer any detailed questions you might have. You can also directly contact our excellent Executive Director, Rana Starr, who used to run McDonald's social compliance program before she left them to head up this initiative. Clay, back to you.
Well, of course, we all know that after Rana Plaza, almost 5 years ago, that was a watershed moment in the industry, and there were several initiatives that were started to try to ensure that there was greater attention paid to health and safety in facilities in Bangladesh, but particularly structural safety. So one of the first initiatives that we'll talk about, and that all of you are probably familiar with, is the Accord on Fire and Building Safety for Bangladesh. This is an independent, legally binding agreement between a number of brands, trade unions, and other stakeholders. It was formally established in May of 2013. So shortly after the April tragedy, this initiative was launched. And as it began to build momentum, there were more than 200 apparel brands, retailers, and importers that signed up as signatories and contributed to the fund. Also included 2 global trade unions, as well as 8 Bangladeshi trade unions and 4 NGO witnesses to the initiative. And so that had an initial run of 5 years, and we can see that they have fully remediated 86 facilities. There are several hundred manufacturing facilities across Bangladesh that are part of the program that are supplying many of the 200 apparel brands and retailers, and they are part of that initiative. But according to the statistics that they have on their website, there are 86 of those hundreds that have actually been fully remediated. And they have available detailed quarterly reports on each of the facilities, including those that may have been rejected from the program. And the key thing that we want to highlight here is that earlier this summer, in June of 2017, the Accord announced that they would go forth with a second term. And this has been somewhat controversial because the Bangladeshi government is not necessarily that keen to have it continue. But there also is question as to, will there be funds? Will the 200 initial signatories or members continue? So that is all yet to play out in the coming weeks and months. And as we look at how Bangladesh, the government there, actually tries to implement programs itself to ensure that the industry in Bangladesh is healthy and safe, and that the industry is competitive. So for detailed information about their ongoing activities, this website will give you, access to that very detailed information. And so now we'll turn to the Alliance.
Thank you, Clay. As you know, those of you who follow the space closely, the Accord membership has been largely based in Europe, certainly with regards to the brands and retailers that are signatories to the Accord. And at the same time as the Accord came to be, a sort of counterpart, corresponding entity, which is focused more on the American buyer community, emerged as well, and that is the Alliance for Bangladesh Worker Safety. That is similar to the Accord, a legally binding 5-year commitment to improve safety in Bangladeshi ready-made garment factories. It was established a couple of months later in July of 2013 after the accord had been established. And the AAFA had a role to play in making that happen. And RAP was involved from the beginning as well. As Nate mentioned again during the intro, I serve on the board of advisors of the Alliance. There are 29 member companies, so in number of members, it may be smaller than the Accord, but in terms of the number of factories that are involved in the Alliance, it has about half as many as the Accord. So certainly fewer members, but involving more factories per member with regards to their engagement in Bangladesh. The Alliance's statistics show remediation has been completed in 195 factories, and there's good progress being made in a whole bunch more. Interestingly enough, the Alliance took a different approach to what they should do upon the official expiration of their mandate in July of 2018, and that is they will not be extending the way the Accord has said they will be extending. Instead, they announced a transition plan in August of this year to say that they will basically they anticipate having some funds still in the coffers by the time July 2018 rolls around. They will use that to fund through the rest of 2018 a transition to an entity that will ideally be far more sustainable and locally sort of based and locally sourced to enable the good work that they've been doing to continue without having to do so under the relatively cumbersome and internationally managed superstructure that is the Alliance. The chairwoman of the Alliance, the Honorable Tosher, recently resigned from her position to concentrate on other works in California, and another sort of indication that the Alliance is standing firm on the decision that they're not going to extend. This will come to an end upon the end of their mandate next year, with allowing for some time, possibly a few months through the end of 2018, to complete a transition to another entity that will be more Bangladeshi in its makeup. And there's the website for the Alliance as well to get further information. Clay, back over to you.
Another less formal initiative, at least right now, is what's being called better buying. This is being designed by Professor Marcia Dixon and Doug Kahn with technical support from the Fair Factories Clearinghouse. This is being designed as a platform to facilitate dialogue and rating that will highlight areas for improved purchasing practices by buyers, by brands and retailers. The mission is to contribute to industry-wide transformation of purchasing practices, buying practices, so that the relationships between suppliers and buyers will actually facilitate decent workplace conditions and not detract from them. Because the premise, which is not new to any of us, is that sometimes the actual buying practices, the sourcing practices of brands and retailers can make it very difficult for the suppliers, the factories, to adhere to the corporate codes of conduct of those customers, and thereby put time, cost pressures on the factory that may lead to excessive overtime, to hard working conditions, to cutting corners. And so this platform should be a rating system that will protect the anonymity of the suppliers, the factories, while providing publicly visible information that will encourage greater communication between these stakeholders and facilitate improvement in these better buying practices. That's why it's called better buying. So it is still a work in progress. Marcia Dixon and Doug Kahn have talked to probably many of you, many of the different stakeholders that are on this call to get input, feedback about how to actually put the program into place. It's still not set in stone. Will there be cost to the program? That is something that they are investigating as they work through this. But this website gives you the basic guidance on what they are doing now, how they plan to go forward. In fact, they have a good FAQ section with, I believe, about 8 different questions that address many of the top-of-mind issues that all of us would come up with. And RAP certainly has been consulted as they have begun to develop this program, and it is certainly a worthy one. Still has a lot of work to be done to see whether it can actually be implemented in a very practicable way. Now, another tool is what is being called RASIA, the Retail Ethical Sourcing Assessment. This is an initiative started by the Home Depot and Lowe's. Because they are very similar types of retailers and they share many of the same suppliers, they decided, Home Depot and Lowe's, that they wanted to try to develop a tool that would allow both of them to share information between the audits that are done at their suppliers, thereby reducing the number of duplicate audits and the audit fatigue that all of us are very much aware of. While this was started by Home Depot and Lowe's and rolled out just a few months ago, earlier March 1st of 2017, they are seeking acceptance from additional retailers, and there are a few of the larger retailers that also are in discussions with them. And so, of course, one of the questions you might ask and that we can come back to is, how does this relate to some of the other initiatives that we've highlighted and that we may talk about this afternoon? There is not an official website for this entity because it is not a formal entity, but contacts at both Home Depot and Lowe's probably can provide additional information on that. And now I think we'll go to Avedis.
Thank you, Clay. I'll take the next couple, and that'll put us back on our track here. We have out there today several interesting mapping initiatives, including the one that I'm going to start talking to you about, the International Trade Center's Standard Map. When I said at the beginning of this webinar that if we were to try and have an exhaustive list of initiatives out there, it'll take much more than the hour we have allotted. And one way to try and find out about the larger space is to go through some of these mapping initiatives out there. And the ITC's is perhaps one of the most comprehensive one. It's meant to basically put in as simple a fashion as possible a comparative grid of the existing sustainability standards and audit protocols. It's aimed to strengthen the capacity of the folks that promulgate those standards, but really it's also meant as a tool to educate folks in the supply chain, exporters and buyers and others participating in the supply chain about what these initiatives are and enable them to compare one to the other. It's meant simply as a comparative tool. It is agnostic with regards to the initiatives themselves. This particular mapping initiative currently covers more than 230 initiatives, and it's cross-sectoral. It isn't limited simply to our space, the apparel, footwear, textile, sewn product space, but it covers stuff in furniture and electronics and a whole bunch of other stuff. And as I said, this one's one of the more comprehensive ones out there, covering 80 different sectors and touching upon entities in about 180 different countries. There's the website for that. There are some other mapping efforts out there that, again, are sort of kind of doing the same thing, trying to give their audiences a lay of the land in a easily absorbable way. And a couple of them that are worth mentioning are GIZ's sustainability standards. GIZ is the German equivalent of USAID, and they have a project that assesses standards and maps them. And then there's also a group called the Institute for Multi-Stakeholder Initiative Integrity, setting up a program called MSI Integrity that also is meant to be a standards map. I commend you to sort of look at these up if you're interested, but the one that we talked most about, the standards map, really is the most comprehensive one out there, and it's a good place to sort of get a bigger picture, more exhaustive list of folks doing stuff in our space. One of those standards that you'll see on on the mapping initiatives, whichever one you go to, is the Textile Exchange. They have a long history in our space, and as I said, I wouldn't be talking about initiatives that have been around for a while, so I'll just say that they've got multiple content claim standards that I won't be addressing. But they're also relatively recent things that they've done that we are particularly connected to in terms of our space, and that includes the responsible down standard and the responsible wool standard, both of which are meant to ensure that the down or the wool in question comes from sources that are socially responsible, from ducks and geese that have been treated well, or from farms with progressive approaches to managing their lands, and from sheep that have been treated well. But the one thing that they're doing that is new and worth including in our survey of current initiatives is a responsible leather initiative that they have just launched. And the idea is to address issues found within the global leather supply chain. This is a fairly ambitious project. It's not simply a matter of a sheep farm or looking at ducks and geese, but rather trying to study the entire supply chain, from the farms to the tanneries through to leather assembly processes. And so this is the new one they have out there. It's not yet a standard. It's still very much a work in progress. There's the website for this particular initiative right there, and there's the website for the Textile Exchange in general if you wish to read up upon about the other standards, the down or the wool standard, or the various claim content standards that they have that you can learn more about at the website. Clay, back to you.
As we said at the beginning of the webinar, we're talking about relatively new initiatives. Well, we all know that socially responsible investors, SRIs, are not new. They've been around since the 50s, the 60s, but there are some relatively new momentum that we're seeing out there. SRIs are becoming much more active. They're initiating many more corporate resolutions, and probably more important, we are seeing that they are engaging much more directly with the brands and the retailers. That may be by actually making shareholder resolutions, or by providing direct, almost organization to organization conversations and suggestions on how to go about making progress in the field. In fact, some of these initiatives have seen the SRIs making suggestions to companies, just a few years ago, that they should publish, their CSR reports or those types of things. But what we're seeing now that may be a little bit newer is that they're becoming much more engaged on broader initiatives. And those usually are in the form of issue-based concerns. Particularly, we've seen such as forced labor and human trafficking. for all of us, this has become a very hot topic, something that is very important. But there are some of the SRIs that are doing a lot of very constructive work and providing a tremendous amount of information, are good resources in and of themselves to help make progress on some of these issues like forced labor and human trafficking. So we expect to see a continued emphasis by a variety of different SRIs, whether they're faith-based organizations or government investment funds, on these types of issue-based concerns. And so, of course, there is no particular website for that, which takes us to Avedis's last of the 10.
Right. So this last one, as I mentioned at the introductory part of the webinar, isn't so much an initiative or a particular set of players, but rather a broad trend that we're seeing, and something that we strongly believe is here to stay. And that is the sort of informal networks that are developing as the CSR community, our space as a whole, continues to mature. You know, those of us who have been doing this for a while, you know, probably feel like it's been several decades of effort, but really this space is only about two and a half decades old to 20 years old by most reckoning in terms of formal approaches to codes of conduct and social compliance auditing and the like. So it's fairly young as far as a workspace, industry space goes. But we're maturing, and we're coming to a point now where many managers, many mid-level, high-level managers that are dealing with social compliance and CSR issues within their organizations have now gotten to know each other a lot better, professionally, and you know, meeting regularly at events, and understanding each other's philosophies and approaches and constraints and thinking, and generally developing informal networks within which to share information. As that maturation process has continued, some of those informal networks have actually developed into initiatives. Some of the things that we've touched upon in the preceding 9 slides have emerged out of the informal networks that some of these managers have been able to establish amongst themselves first, before widening the net, so to speak. And what has made that possible has been the fact that over the last decade, decade and a half, multiple CSR conferences, social responsibility events, committees, have now become well established. And these provide the platform for such networks to be formed, because it allows these people to have a regular contact point, once a year, twice a year, however many times, to see each other and talk about things that are of interest. You know, a great example is, of course, the AAFA's Social Responsibility Committee. I know this particular webinar is open to folks that are both members and not members, but those of you who are not should certainly think about becoming members. Nate, you can pay me later. It's an important platform, as I said, not just for information gathering, but also for establishing such networks. And that is one of the reasons why we're seeing an increase in the number of these initiatives to try and engage across competitive lines and deal with these pre-competitive issues, because we've seen the maturation and the formation of these networks. As part of this, another very interesting element is that a lot of the folks, certainly the bigger brands and bigger retailers, you know, they have over the years set up foundations to help with charity work as well as with CSR work in general. And we've seen these foundations now start to stop being simply philanthropic arms of their parent brands or retailers, but become folks that are funding industry-wide initiatives. It's no longer simply helping out the brand name or doing charity in that brand's name, but organizing efforts around issues that are important to that brand, but also involving other brands and other players. And we're seeing this become a feature of some foundation driven efforts that are now including multiple participants, including other foundations, including folks that would, you know, in theory, be competitors with the parent entity's, you know, space. So it's an important development, an interesting development, and as I said, one that I think is going to signal the way forward for our industry for times to come. There are in the offing several attempts by big players to convene industry summits to discuss the state of affairs in the CSR space and social compliance space. RAP will be a part of those, and they might then lead to some formal initiative, or they might stay in the informal network space. But those informal networks, as I said, are becoming much more effective and certainly proliferating quite a bit, where they are then able to gain the benefit of receiving funds from a foundation. And the C&A Foundation probably stands out as one that is doing a lot of great work in this space in terms of funding initiatives. Then that can also help in the formalization of the effort. But the main point I want to make on this particular slide is that even without formal initiatives that they end up coalescing into, these informal networks are proving to be very important, very effective, and very much a feature now of the current landscape. And looking forward into the foreseeable future, I see this as being one of the things that's going to take the industry forward. Which brings us to the end of the sort of lecture part of this. I want to thank you all for your patience and participation, and we're hoping to save a good chunk of time for Q&A, and I think we've been able to achieve that. And I will turn it over to Nate to help direct the traffic for the Q&A.
Thank you, Avedis. Thank you, Clay. That was a great overview of a lot of the various initiatives out there. Before we get to questions, I just wanted to talk about what we're trying to do here at AAFA in relation to all these initiatives. We are working along with RAP and many others to try and take the industry forward. There's been a recognition over the last few years that auditing is necessary but not sufficient. We need to go beyond what we call compliance and try and move the industry forward. And so all the initiatives that Avedis and Clay talked about are efforts to try and move the industry forward. Large part is about collaboration. The Alliance and the Accord have sort of gotten rid of a lot of boogeymen in the room in terms of saying that we can't work together, we can't share information, we can't be transparent. Both the Alliance and the Accord have been very successful by being collaborative, by being transparent, and so it's gotten rid of those boogeymen. The sky didn't fall. The Better Buying Initiative is talking about internal collaboration. It's trying to give the social compliance folks and companies the evidence, the ammunition they need so they can talk to sourcing, talk to materials development, product development, and talk about the issues that come up when orders are changed halfway through or the timeline has changed. And so that helps create internal collaboration. The APSCo initiative and the Social Labor Convergence Project are trying to knock down the barriers that people have given, the reasons people have given for not collaborating on things as basic as audits. And so that's why all these initiatives are important to listen to. They might seem on their own small steps, but taken together, they can really move not just our industry, but many industries forward on these issues. So with that, I'll start the questions. The very first one, which is not a surprise, is basically what is the difference between the Alliance and the Accord? So I know which one of you wants to take that one on.
I'll take that one. I think the short answer really is very little. With regards to substantive requirements of the factories under their purview, the Accord and the Alliance actually have exactly the same technical requirements. They came together and agreed upon what the actual sort of requirements are to have a safe, structurally sound, electrically sound, and fire-safe facility. And so, with regards to what they expect of factories, there is no difference. The only difference is truly simply in makeup, and as I sort of touched upon in my presentation, the Accord has evolved into a largely European entity in terms of the brands and retailers that are members of the Accord, and the Alliance has been mainly US-based. There's a few differences in terms of governance as well. Again, as the slides mentioned, the The Alliance and the Accord both are multi-stakeholder initiatives, but the sort of governance structures are a little bit different with regards to engagement with trade unions at the European level and at the Bangladeshi level, and how the sort of governing body functions in terms of who's on their boards. So there's some structural differences in makeup, but substantively speaking, they are both trying to do exactly the same thing, and both have done incredibly good work and have truly helped make progress in this space that was sorely in need of it in Bangladesh. And so on that front, both are to be greatly appreciated and recognized.
So that follow-on question to that then, so why is one continuing and one's not? I mean, if they've been successful, what's happening then? Also, I think the Bangladesh government is starting their own initiative, I think called the Shoman proposal.
Yes.
Can you just briefly discuss why there's this difference in terms of going forward?
Yeah, now we're getting into tougher territory. And to be perfectly honest, I can't give a candid response and not touch upon some of the politics. I honestly think that while they are structurally the same, as I said, in terms of what they're trying to achieve, the requirements, the way they've gone about it from the beginning has been rather different. I think the Alliance has tended to, and they've both been excellent about using qualified people to do the assessment work, but the Alliance has from the very beginning kind of had the belief that the idea is we should be able to transfer these skills to the local government, to the local organizations, and have them carry on, and we want to be able to do this within the 5 years that we're here. Whereas the Accord probably was a little more skeptical of the ability of the local entities and the local government to kind of take up that function in just 5 years. It really simply, I think, is a matter of just how much, I don't want to use the word credit, but how you feel about the readiness of local organizations to take over. I think both the Alliance and the Accord recognize that the government is not quite there yet in terms of capacity, in terms of resources. I won't go into the softer issues of whether or not there is the credibility there, but the Alliance has made the commitment that we're going to try and make that transfer and hopefully have enough oversight in the process to ensure that it is done in a credible way, and that's why there's likely going to be a lot of conversation with Shoman when it comes to that transition plan. Whereas the Accord, I think, has made the call that, look, we just don't feel comfortable yet. We're not at the place where we think the government can take this over. The only way we feel we can continue doing the good work that we're doing to the level that we have established for it is to continue doing it ourselves. So really, philosophical differences is what it comes down to, and that's why one of them has extended. And the politics that I alluded to is kind of the final point I'll make on this, and that is, as Clay pointed out, the extension has not been necessarily well received in Bangladesh. I think there was a unilateral decision that the government and many other stakeholders in the Bangladeshi community were not pleased with. And so I wonder, if there is value in the Alliance's approach to say, hey, it might not be perfect. We don't think you're quite there yet, but we want you to, get more involved, and we'll help. But it really can't be up to us. I think in the end, even the Accord has to realize that the answer can't be, extension after extension. At some point, local capacity has to be built, and I know that's what they want to do. But I think their position is that it's still too early for that, and the only way to continue the work to this level, as I said, is to continue doing it themselves, which is why they made the decision that they did.
Hey, thanks. So another question's come in, and Clay, you talked about, sorry, that's another question. So this question relates to the initiatives that are out there, and one of the attendees asked, are there initiatives out there that focus on the community where the factories are operating, either to help the workers in terms of outside the factory with their families, or or help the communities where the villages and towns where the factories are based? Are there any larger initiatives in that space? Because most of what you talked about was unrelated to that.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of work being done, and this is probably the traditional sort of philanthropic kind of stuff that the foundations used to do almost exclusively, and that involves sort of community, funding a school or some other, or a health clinic or the like. And they continue to be out there. There's folks that do great work in this space, but not at the sort of collective level, at the holistic level that we're discussing here. They tend to be sort of our brand's own pet project type stuff. But Clay, you touched upon the Better Buying Initiative, and that has some implications here. And as you said, SLCP involves manufacturers directly. So maybe you want to build a little bit upon those two as examples of the ones that we did talk about that does sort of touch upon this issue.
Okay. As Avedis said, these don't necessarily focus on the communities themselves, but better buying is really about facilitating the communication directly between the manufacturing facilities and their buyers that are based wherever they may be around the world. And those particular initiatives may actually take on some elements of what's going on in the local community, but the Better Buying Initiative isn't really focused on that area as well. Similarly, for the Social and Labor Convergence Project, a key thing that is always emphasized and needs to be re-emphasized here is that this is not about the global brands, the international side of the equation, telling the local manufacturers, this is what you need to do. The old comply or die, do it our way, or we don't place orders with you. Among those 157 signatories, there are, probably 40 plus, almost 50 manufacturers of varying sizes that are involved in actually helping to develop the tools, the assessment tool and the verification tool, and figuring out how, through the prototypes, how that actually will be implemented in their facilities, thereby how that would actually implement the work that they do in their local communities. Both Better Buying and Social Labor Convergence are about trying to help all stakeholders, the buyers and the manufacturers, be efficient, effective, productive, and profitable businesses, to using their resources in the best fashion forward so that their workers are actually able to have more successful, more profitable lives, better livelihoods in essence, thereby strengthening their communities.
Thanks. So now following up on something Clay said about audit fatigue, there's concern with all the initiatives that you guys have laid out today that there could be initiative fatigue, for lack of a better term. How would you recommend smaller and medium-sized companies who obviously can't commit the time and resources to all these initiatives, or how would you suggest they approach this or figure out which ones work best for them?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nate, and definitely one that we get asked increasingly these days. It's true. There's a lot of stuff out there. The positive of that is that there's something for everyone. If you're interested in engaging with a group that is focused on improving the leather supply chain, and that's kind of your space, then there's something for you to bite into there. And if you want another flavor, there's something there. But the other challenge, the flip side of that is, as you said, how do you keep track of all this, especially if you're a small and medium organization, don't have the bandwidth to follow them all. I think there is certainly a high risk of initiative fatigue. And one of the reasons why some of those informal networks are gearing up to kind of come together and have a conversation is precisely to ward that off, to say which of these initiatives, of the many out there, should we collectively pool our resources towards, and therefore increase its chances of success. If everyone's trying to do little things here, there, and everywhere, then the dilution of resources decreases the chance of any one of them to succeed. Whereas if we come together and pool together, we increase the chances there. So I would suggest that smaller organizations that be selective in the ones that they follow. Obviously, the ones that are not in their direct space, they can safely ignore. But my advice would be to pick those initiatives that are really not necessarily issue-based so much as trying to solve a broader process problem. And I think you, Nate, made the point about how APSCo and SLCP in particular are not simply trying to do just the little thing within their mission, but that is meant on the larger stage to remove roadblocks towards the brands and retailers being able to share audits with each other. So it's not just a matter of solving the question of professionalizing the audit industry, but that has implications for the broader CSR space, because one main reason that audit reports are not shared as freely as one would hope they should be these days is because the brands and retailers don't necessarily know that they can trust the auditor that did the audit in question. Even if the audit is asking the same questions as their audit asks, they can't be sure that it was asked with the same degree of veracity and the same degree of credibility. So if you remove that barrier, then you are further enhancing the ability of sharing, because that's a major challenge. So I would recommend that the initiatives, and I would number APSCo among those, SLCP among those, that have broader implications than just the specific mission, be the ones that be focused on and participated in.
And I'll add that in very honest terms, forums such as this, the AAFA, provide real resources for both the large, medium, and small entities to participate in, or at minimum to gain insight into different types of initiatives. For instance, AAFA is certainly a signatory to the Social Labor Convergence Project and is supportive of the APSCo initiative and very much aware of many of the others.
Excellent point.
Well, thank you guys. That's all the time we have for questions. And so we're going to conclude today's webinar. As we close, I want to again thank Avedis and Clay for providing us with such good insight and valuable information. The American Apparel and Footwear Association also thanks RAP for sponsoring today's webinar. As a reminder, you will receive an email with the links to the PDF and to the recording of today's presentation. Thank you again, everyone, for joining today's webinar.
Thank you, Nate. Bye.
Thank you.